right, so how many of you guys know how many meters are in a kilometer? Yes.
1,000.
Yes, it makes sense because kilo means 1,000. All right, now how many of you guys know how many yards are in a mile?
Isn't it 1,760?
Yeah, so you weren't supposed to know that, but it's a very arbitrary number, which is one of the problems that we have with our current measurement system.
Because the three of us are STEM majors, we have a unique perspective getting to use the metric and imperial system in our daily lives.
The U.S. should switch from the imperial system to the metric system for many reasons. Some of these reasons include that it is confusing and time-consuming to try to teach two different measurement systems. And the metric system is much easier to use and more commonly used in many fields. There are some problems we need to overcome in order for the U.S. to make the switch, but I think we've come up with a pretty good solution for these problems.
All right, so starting off with the problems, our first one is a problem that's found in academia, which is an argument made from Price, a middle school teacher, in his article, Which One, America?, which is published in 2001. Basically, this article talks about Price's experience teaching to middle schoolers, and he noticed that a lot of the middle schoolers really struggle when they already know the imperial system to then try to learn the metric system, and it's very confusing on them to have to be held to a standard of knowing two systems of measurement. And then he argues as well on the side of the teacher that it adds a lot to his workload. Teachers already have a very, very busy schedule, and he argues that nothing is ever really taken out of the curriculum. So just getting rid of the imperial system and switching fully to the metric system would clear up teacher schedules as well as take out confusion from the students.
A second problem is confusion in real life. According to Monroe's Say Yes to the Metric System written in 2009, NASA had a Mars orbiter that crashed into the surface because of an error between the computer and the satellite, where the computer was outputting metric units and the satellite wanted imperial units, causing it to crash into the surface. This $200 million error was the cause of not only communication error, but it could have been prevented if the U.S. only used metric, preventing the error.
All right, so we covered some of the problems that are with the imperial system that we use. So let's go on to some of the causes with the system, starting with just a basic history. So Celsius is the metric unit for temperature, so it starts with 0 being freezing point and 100 being boiling point. That makes a lot of sense. It's very simple, intuitive, and that was actually formed way back in 1742 by an astronomer named Anders Celsius. And then on the other hand, the imperial unit for it is Fahrenheit, which I'm sure we're all familiar, and it actually bases the freezing temperature on some strange substance mixture of ice, salt, and water, and the freezing point for that, which is not very intuitive. Then it also bases the human body temperature at 86 degrees, as well as boiling point at 212. This was developed by a physicist in France, and this has its flaws as well, along with the conversion between metric and imperial. We have a problem where a lot of people think that the blood temperature average is actually 98.6, when that's actually just an incorrect notion that's made from a conversion error. So then let's look at France. So France tried to adopt the metric system in the 1790s during the height of their French Revolution, and it was in an effort to bring unity to all the provinces, as well as provide a lot of clarity between the conversions that were being made by all the different systems of measurement that they had. Thomas Jefferson, after seeing this, decided that he wanted to implement the metric system into the United States, so he lobbied for that. However, we were not able to adopt it as the U.S. wasn't comfortable basing something off of France, as relations with them were not pure at the time. But he was able to advocate for a base 10 currency, which is why we have 100 pennies in $1. So then, let's look at Britain. Fast forward in the 1960s, more relevant time. We see Britain transition from the imperial system to the metric system, or at least begin their transition. In the 1970s, we tried to do that. So at this point, the United States is the only industrialized nation that is not on the metric system. But all our attempts have failed. There are still some ramifications of all these attempts to switch in the 1900s. As for example, we see bottles of pop being sold in 2 liters, which is in fact a metric unit.
The reason some of these attempts failed are because people have a hard time visualizing the metric system. They don't know what a kilometer, how far a kilometer is. They feel like they have a better grasp on the imperial system because they grew up with it. They don't have a very good grasp on the metric system because they're only exposed in school science classes. And this leads to a bad rep for the metric system, leading people to believe that it's only used in science and the imperial system's used in everyday life. This has caused stuff like NASA losing a $200 million satellite, or the US not, it affects the US's trade too. To some people, it may seem the US is kilometers away from changing to the metric system. But we believe that with some of our proposals, that we can get that kilometers to meters pretty easily. So let's hear about some of the solutions.
So the solution that we came up with has like a couple different steps. The first part is that we would need to teach the metric system much more in depth in schools. And then the second part is we would have to very, very gradually switch over to the metric system to cause like a minimum amount of confusion. So first we need to teach much more in depth compared to now, so people actually know how to use all the units and what they are. Because right now in the US, it's only like briefly taught in some classes when it's needed for the most part. And it's mainly taught in like science and engineering classes that use this unit regularly, even in the US. We would have to very slowly reduce the amount of imperial units being used, and then slowly increase the amount of metric being taught over time, and then eventually we basically just fade out the imperial system completely and only use metric units like most other countries do. The next part includes very slowly transitioning into the new system. As I stated in the last part, even like teaching it is going to be a very slow process, but the overall process for the country is going to be a lot more confusing and lengthy, especially for older generations that have been using the imperial system for their entire lives. Also, it takes time for big industries that use measurements regularly to switch over completely, because like, all of their products and everything they do is already in imperial. When Great Britain made the switch to metric, they had to survey like 50 different industries in the country to see if it was actually a practical idea to switch over. And they chose to mainly for trade purposes. And they decided it would take up to 10 years to transition to the metric system. But depending on the industry, it could take much less time or much more time than that. This is because measurements are a very large part of some industries, like I said. For example, building materials like screws are generally in inches in the US, and these are used like for almost everything in like construction and stuff. So switching those to metric units would be kind of a difficult process. So basically, metric will become more and more common as like younger generations grow up, since they're the ones being taught these metric units. And older generations would still have to adapt and learn some new metric stuff, but it's highly unlikely that they'll actually completely switch over to metric. And this information is found in Marketing's Role in the Change to the Metric System by Frank Archer in 1966.
All right, so we hope you guys feel the same way that we do about this issue, in that the United States should switch from its current imperial system over to the metric system.
The US would benefit from switching to metric because we wouldn't have to learn 2 systems anymore. And it would help many fields that already use metric, because then everything would be in metric. We've tried to switch in the past, and it may be very confusing to actually fully change everything. But with the gradual process of switching over, the US could definitely make the full switch to metric.
And if we don't start switching soon, the rest of the world will start moving past the US, and just the US will fall behind because we don't use metric.